Hi, welcome to today's video. In the last video in my series about how to make an illustration step by step, we finished our value and color studies. And today I'm going to show you how to get that nice drawing that we did and get it onto our watercolor paper. Alright, so today, like I said, I'm going to show you how to transfer your drawing to watercolor paper, and we're going to jump right in and I'm going to show you how to do it with your printer. If you want to do that or try that, you can. And then toward the end, I'll discuss like other ways that I've done it when the printer wouldn't work for various reasons. So that's the order that we're going to go in today. My printer is an Epson Workforce 7610. And it's a print scan unit that's all in one, and it's also a large format printer, and I really love it. And one of the reasons is because it's good. It's been really good for printing onto watercolor paper. So I'm going to show you how I do that. In the past, before I had this one, I had a Workforce 7510, and I also really like that one, except the newer one, the 7610, has a rear paper feed slot, in the 7510 didn't. So I would take my watercolor paper with that one and I'd kind of like roll it like this, which you're not supposed to do, but I did it anyway. It seemed to work. I'd roll it like this and get it to go through, because it had to loop around through, you know, like this, to get through the printer. And when the printer broke, surprise, surprise, the paper feeding thing broke. So, word of warning, you can try it. I did it for at least 2 years before my printer broke and I had to buy a new one, but it might break. So if you're looking specifically to buy a new printer that you can use to print on watercolor paper and stuff, look for something that has a rear feed slot. I like the 7610. The other thing that you want to look for is printers that print with waterproof ink. So the Epson does a really good job. Like, I can print on it and I don't ever notice the ink bleeding anywhere after I use my watercolors. I used to have, a really long time ago, an HP printer, and I would print on that one and use it and the ink would bleed. But it didn't bother me. Like, it still mostly stayed there so I could still see my lines. It would just bleed a little bit and maybe make the colors a little funky. So maybe it would bother me now. I mean, like I said, it was a few years ago. Maybe it would. But anyway, I say it's worth experimenting and trying this out with your printer if you can. So first things first, we need to have our paper ready. And I have mine ready to go. This is a piece of Arches cold press. We're going to do this painting on cold press paper. The reason I'm picking cold press for this picture is because since like the face and everything is so big, I don't feel like I'm going to need to do lots of little tiny details, and I'm also not planning on doing like ink or Prismacolor on the top. So the texture, I really like the texture of the cold press. I really like how you can scrub out mistakes and stuff like that. In fact, if you want to know about scrubbing out mistakes, I did make a video called How to Fix Your Watercolor Mistakes or something like that. I can't remember. I'll link to it, that you can watch if you want to know a little bit more about that. But anyway, I like the cold press for that. The hot press isn't as forgiving, but it's still, you can still do it. So cold press Arches paper. Arches is my favorite brand, because I know you guys are going to ask. But yeah, if you want to know more about watercolor paper, I've also done a video called What Kind of Watercolor Paper Should I Choose? And that one I'll also link to in the cards. I don't know where they'll be, over there or over there, something like that. Okay, so I have my paper. I printed this, or I haven't printed it. I cut it at 13 by 19. That is as big as my printer prints, because it's a large format printer. And the final painting is going to be an 11 by 14 painting, so it will fit on this. But when you're doing this, whether you're printing it or transferring it, like I'm going to show you at the end of the video, you want to make sure that you have space around the edges of your illustration, which you'll see why when we start painting, but I'll tell you also, because I haven't done anything to my sketch to add any kind of bleed yet, which I think maybe needs to be its own video talking about what a bleed is on an illustration, but it's basically extra space that it's okay if it gets cut off or covered up, if that makes sense. So you want to add that in, and if you're painting digitally, you're probably not watching this video, but you need to add that bleed around the side of your page. So I usually do it at this stage. And then you also need room to attach your tape around the sides. So if you print it and your print goes like all the way to the corners and then you tape it down so that you can paint on it, then your picture is going to be covered up and that would be bad. So plan some extra space. So if you're printing on a little printer, maybe you don't have a large format, don't do it unless you can add that little bit of extra space. And if you're like, I don't have a large format, what do I do? Stick around to the end and I'll show you. Okay, hopefully that all made sense and was useful. So now I'm going to show you my computer. So let's move over there. All right, here is my file pulled up in Photoshop. This is the same file that we used before when we printed out the little drawings to make value studies on the piece of paper. Lots of times I will have a new drawing file when I get to this stage, because when I'm doing color studies I'll find things in the drawing that I need to fix. But in this case there wasn't really anything that I fixed then. So okay, so we're going to print this file. The first thing I'm going to do is print this. I'm going to lighten it to about 40 to 50% capacity, somewhere in there. So when it prints on the paper, it will be lighter and I can draw over the top and make changes. And these lines from the printer won't actually show up through the watercolor once I start painting, but my pencil lines will. So it means like if I'm going along and I find a mistake in this drawing or something that I want to change or fix, that I'll be able to do that without having a big mess on my hands. That's why I like to do it that way. I'm going to put it around 43% and I'm going to go up and choose File, Print, and under Print Settings I'm going to use 13 by 19 paper, which my printer will let me do because it's that large format again. And then under Print Settings I'm going to use the rear paper feed slot. And I'm going to pick cardstock paper because it's a little bit thicker, so it should have an easier time pulling the thick watercolor paper through, even though watercolor paper is quite a bit thicker than cardstock. And I'm going to do fine quality and I'm going to save it. I'm going to make sure it's the right orientation, so we have it in landscape. And as you can see on this preview, that there's plenty of room between the drawing and the edge of the paper, so that gives me room to tape it and gives me room for a bleed. So now at this point it's ready to go. I'm going to click print and print it. Alright, so you saw that printout and you can see, maybe you can see how lightly it printed on here. So it's pretty light. That'll get kind of covered up with the watercolor paper, and now I can go over and draw on it. I'm going to show you a couple things that I do when I'm taping watercolor to my paper to a board. So one of them is I just use normal masking tape, the cream colored kind. I don't use the blue painter's tape because I feel like it's so bright blue that it's going to like throw off the colors on my painting, because when you get something next to something else, like those colors influence each other. So I prefer this one much more than the blue, and I've never really had trouble taking it off as long as I'm careful. So this is what I recommend. But if you really want to use the blue stuff, then I'd probably use the blue stuff and then put this over the top so that that blue color doesn't mess you up. Just for demonstration or purpose sake, I know you can't see the drawing very well because it's really light, but I'm going to show you where the drawing ends and where I put the tape so you can see what I mean by a bleed. So this is where my drawing ends basically right now, but I want to add about a 1/2 inch of space all the way around, so that when I'm working with it, if I'm doing like a book cover or picture book or design, like there's going to be extra space before the painting ends so that you can adjust it and move it, or if you're framing it, you can cover that part up and it will just look much better. So yeah, I'll show you that in a minute. So the other thing I do that I noticed some of my art students doing when they do their tape, they get little pieces and put it all along. Don't do that. So I just take a big piece, I measure how long I need it, and I'm gonna put it down, and I'm gonna save that space, like I said. Okay, I have it all taped. So on the sides, I used this thick tape just because if you remember when I printed it, I was printing it on 13 by 19, so it had this extra space over here. So I just went ahead and used the thick tape on the ends, and then I used the thin tape to get to where I wanted. So I still have, if you can see right here, I still have that basically 1/2 inch bleed. I didn't measure my bleed. I just figure as long as there's some, that's good. But if you have a client and they say we need this much bleed, you better measure. But in this case, we didn't. So I'm gonna erase my marks because I don't need these anymore. I just wanted them to show you. And then I'm gonna start drawing. So one more thing I just remembered while I was erasing. You didn't see me erase because I didn't record it. But when you're drawing and erasing, when you're erasing on watercolor paper, you want to try to use your kneadable eraser. It's going to be nicer to the texture of the paper. Watercolor paper, especially the good stuff, which is, you know, the good stuff, is going to have a sizing on it to help your watercolors smoothly cover and soak into the paper. And if you're going at it with an eraser, you're going to take that off and you're going to have problems when you start painting. So use your kneadable eraser and try to erase as little as possible if you can. Alright guys, here's the finished drawing. It did take quite a while, most of the afternoon, because I had to do a lot of fixing, especially with the perspective and whatnot with the spinning wheel. A lot of what I did was just simplifying some of the shapes that I had, so I just made these more simple, and I think it looks a lot better. I also changed a little bit on the fingernails and just other random things. I made the feather shorter up here just because I felt like it was too much of an eye trap. Like it wasn't a tangent, but it was almost a tangent. You guys can't even see. Anyway, just little things that I've noticed here and there as I was working. So that's why I print it light. So it's pretty much ready to paint now. But I did promise that I would talk to you about how I do this if maybe this is too big for my printer or the paper doesn't want to go through, which if you watched in the time lapse of the printer, I think it took about 4 tries for me to get this paper to go through. Sometimes it goes like right through, like so fast. Sometimes it doesn't. This time the paper, it just couldn't like pick it up and pull it through. I kept getting a message of I didn't load the paper deep enough. But if your printer won't do it, what you want to do is print out your drawing on a normal piece of paper. If you don't have a big enough printer, then you want to tile your drawing so that you can make it as big. So if you want an 11 by 14 drawing, you might have like 4 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. So I would usually do something like that, and then I would tape them together so that it's the size that I want. Hopefully that makes sense because I'm not going to show you. But if you have questions about it, go ahead and ask if I don't explain something well. And then I use this graphite transfer paper, which I'm sure you guys have seen before, where it's just, you know, graphite on one side. And I'll basically have my watercolor paper. I'll usually have it, do I have it taped usually? I don't think I tape it yet. So just have the loose sheet of watercolor paper, and I have my like tiled papers that are printed together, like taped together. So I tape them together, I tape them to the watercolor paper, and then I'll just lift this up and slip the transfer paper in between, you know, something like this. And I'll just use the one sheet and move it around until I get the whole thing. And it's usually, once it's done, it's pretty light on there. So then I'll go in and do this step again, redrawing the drawing so that I have it how I want it. And this paper is reusable. You can see I've used it before. So one other trick for that, I'll usually use like a blue, so I'll use a blue or red coal erase pencil for my transfer. So I'll have my transfer paper and then my piece of paper that's printed with the drawing, and then it's usually printed in black and white. And then if I use my red pencil, I can see where I've traced already on the paper. So sometimes I still have to do that. Sometimes it doesn't work to print, but it is faster to print, but not impossible if you can't do it. Last but not least, I'm still doing my Patreon giveaway. I have these little pins. They're just square, or pins, buttons, a square button that I'm giving away to all my patrons. So it doesn't matter what level, you can pledge at $1 or higher, and you just have to do it before the end of September 2018, and you'll get one of these. Aren't they cute? I think they're cute. So go do that. My Patreon is patreon.com/tailsfantastic. Thanks you guys for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you learned something. Comment below if you have any questions, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done it yet. Thanks. A pretty dark pencil. Maybe back.